Okay, hello everybody. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Please write in chat. Excellent, okay. Maria can. Anybody else? Just to see the general tendency. Please write, or just put a plus if you can see me and hear me, okay. Okay, excellent. Good. I think everything is working. Okay, let's begin by apologies for the little delay that we had. As usual, there are always some technical issues at the beginning of the webinar, but now everything's solved, so I'm very happy that you're all here and waited for a little bit. Okay, so today, as you know, we're going to talk about pronunciation, and thank you very much for joining our webinar. For those of you who are here for the first time, you can write your questions and comments into chat, or if they are extremely important, as you feel, you can also write them into the rubric questions, which you can see at the top of the screen. So I will be checking it at the end of the presentation, and hopefully I will be able to answer the questions that you've asked me. And today we're going to discuss major pronunciation issues that ESL learners have. We will discuss how to solve them, how to teach pronunciation in general, and also what tools and games you can use to do this, to make sure that it's a little bit more fun. Okay, and I'm sure that most of us will admit that we concentrate quite a lot in our teaching on grammar and vocabulary, but we don't really spend that much time on pronunciation. However, this I'm very strongly convinced should be changed, because pronunciation is a basic quality of language learning. And what happens is, if your student has poor pronunciation, this will prevent him or her from being understood, and all the grammar and vocabulary that you've taught them so carefully will go to waste, in a sense. And another thing is that the goal of pronunciation and teaching pronunciation is not to make your students sound like a native speaker, although that does of course sound very attractive. The goal is to have them pronounce words correctly. So your students should have realistic expectations of their pronunciation. The only way to get rid of the accent completely is by being sort of subjected to the language at a certain age. So this happens with children, who are exposed to the second language for extended periods of time and quite early on, so they are able to eliminate the accent. With adults, unfortunately, foreign accent can never be completely eliminated. So your students should have realistic expectations of their pronunciation, and the goal of pronunciation lessons, as I said, should be to teach them to pronounce words correctly. In any case, an accent is a part of who you are, and it might be a part of your students' cultural heritage. So there's nothing wrong with having it. What is important is correct pronunciation. So how do we begin by teaching? How do we begin teaching pronunciation? Well, the way to do this, the best way to do this will be to start with assessment. So you assess your student and you find areas to work on. There are several ways you can do this. So the first kind of method is to have your student read a passage from a book. And many pronunciation books have such a passage which covers all the vowel sounds, all the consonant sounds, all the question and statement intonation that your students should be able to reproduce. So they read the passage, and as they do this, you either take notes or you tape them and then analyze their pronunciation later. And the second thing you can do is to have an interview with your student on a very casual, undemanding topic. And again, you may choose to take notes on their pronunciation as they speak, but I would recommend taping the interview to make sure that you're not distracted from the actual communication, and the student isn't distracted by you writing and writing. So the second thing is have an interview with them and tape it. Okay, and there are some things that you should listen for. So first of all, does the student articulate words clearly? Do they pronounce the more difficult words appropriately? Do they use assimilation in suitable places? Also, you should listen for the intonation that they use, because some students tend to speak very flatly, and this is again something to correct. And are the students differentiating between questions statements. Can you hear that as well in their pronunciation? And what you do once you've interviewed them is you make a table of common pronunciation mistakes, and you can put a tick next to the mistakes that your students have made. So speaking of common mistakes, let's have a look at some favorites. Okay, and the first one is, of course, the sound f. Now that this is one of the hardest consonant sounds to pronounce, and as you know, it can be pronounced in three ways. So as the, such as this, that, these, those; as the voiceless f, such as three, thing, and thought; and as t, such as tie or Thames. Now then, the pronunciation of the f is especially difficult for Russian-speaking students who tend to pronounce sing instead of sing, yes, and closed instead of clothed, for example. So this it might be very likely that you might need to work on that with your student. The second mistake that students often make at different levels is pronouncing the schwa sound. And this is a sound that is typical in unstressed syllables. Yeah, for example, long words like memory, chocolate, or even shorter words like the. So the usual mistake is for students to pronounce all the word syllables. For example, they say memory, yeah, instead of memory. The third mistake is pronouncing the short so in words like live, sit, fit, hit. So usually what students like to do is they pronounce them as leave, seat, feet, or heat, yeah, instead of live, sit, fit, and hit. The fourth mistake is mixing the w and the v. So this is typical not just for Russian-speaking students, but for quite a few European nations. So some students, they can pronounce water as water and west as vest, yeah, which might then lead to some confusion. So that's another thing you might need to work on. The fifth mistake is pronouncing the magic E. So quite a lot of words end with E. However, you should teach your students not to pronounce them. So instead of saying note, yeah, they should say note. And instead of beta, yeah, it should be bite, for example. And finally, these might be the silent consonants, yeah. So especially for those students who read the word before they hear it, yeah, they might pronounce Wednesday as Wednesday, yes, and foreign, they might pronounce the G. So these are just some ways you can prepare yourself for the test, and you can include these common mistakes in the chart that you make, but of course your students might make others, so pay attention to those. Okay, and once you've determined your students' pronunciation level, then you can adapt your syllabus to suit their needs. So let's say that you have a student with beginner pronunciation, and this is where most of the work needs to be done. So at beginner level, you should teach them general pronunciation rules, and you should try and ensure that their speech is comprehensible. If you have intermediate students with intermediate pronunciation level, at this stage, their speech is generally comprehensible, and they have mastered the basics. So this is the time to work on individual and common errors, and also to polish stress and intonation. And in fact, the toughest point, in my opinion, is when you have an advanced student, because very often their English would be so advanced that the only thing that technically differentiates them from native speakers is their accent. So at advanced level, students are usually quite obsessed with accent reduction, and this might be the most stubborn problem for them. So again, here you should talk to your student and explain that truly unaccented English might seem an impossible aim, but again, this is something that you can help them work towards by using media, films, have them copy speakers, and in fact we're going to discuss some more strategies, yeah, on how you might help them to reduce the accent if this is their goal. Okay, I would like to make a short pause, and perhaps you have some questions that have come up at this stage, so I'll try and answer those. Okay, anything about testing your students? Okay, yes, you would like to have more materials on the platform. I will have to discuss this with the moderators. What we will be doing today, I will be giving you different games and tasks that you can use for teaching pronunciation, but I definitely agree it would be nice to have some books and articles on pronunciation. So yes, thank you for that comment, Galina. And Dilara agrees, yes. We do need more. As I've mentioned, grammar and vocabulary seem to be very popular these days, but pronunciation deserves just as much attention, so we definitely need more materials. Okay, moving on. I would like to share some perhaps general teaching tips that you can use for helping your students improve their pronunciation. And the first tip is to teach them listening first. So it's virtually impossible for students to produce the right sounds in English if they cannot hear and distinguish those sounds from one another. So first, teaching pronunciation means starting with listening and making sure that your students can distinguish the sounds that they will then later produce themselves. So the way to do this is, for example, to have them listen to minimal pairs, which are words that sound similar but have one sound different. And you have them listen to minimal pairs and then put the words into two columns. For example, the short vowel column and the long vowel column. So in fact, we'll be talking about minimal pairs a bit later on. So number one, teach them to listen and distinguish. Number two is teach them one phoneme at a time. So improving pronunciation sounds very vague, very general, and it also sounds as a goal that might seem unattainable. So instead of telling your students, okay, today we're going to improve your pronunciation, teach them one phoneme at a time, one phoneme per lesson, and this makes this goal of improving pronunciation a lot more achievable. And another thing is that you might want to dedicate the whole lesson to working on pronunciation, but in my opinion, a better thing would be to have to allocate a part of your lesson, maybe like 10 minutes, to working on one phoneme instead of having them drill phonemes and sounds the whole lesson. This way, it won't be as daunting, and still every lesson you will have this part of pronunciation practice. Okay, so number two, teach them one phoneme at a time. Don't throw everything at them at once. My third tip is to use choral repetition, and this is very useful if you are teaching a group or a class. So choral repetition is a commonly used method of drilling, and all students have to do here is simply to repeat words or phrases after you. And this is a good method because it means that students are given a model pronunciation immediately before they are asked to respond. It might seem a little bit monotonous, having you speak and students repeat, and then you speak and students repeat again. And the way you can break up the monotonous way is to change the speed or the volume you use, and have the students try and copy the speed and the volume as well as the pronunciation. This is another thing that I would recommend. And if you're teaching them a long word with multiple syllables, then you can start with the final syllable of the word and have your class or student repeat it. And then you try and build up on that, So for example, if you have a word like pronunciation, start with shun, and students repeat shun. Then you say nunciation, students repeat nunciation, and then you say pronunciation, and students repeat the whole word, starting from the last syllable. So this is the third tip. The fourth tip, again, this is for teaching groups and classes, is drilling in pairs. And what happens here is, as material becomes more familiar, you may want to split your students into pairs and conduct activities where a student's pronunciation is tested by his or her partner, since you can't really check everybody at the same time. And it is true that drilling is not the most fun part of teaching or learning English, but it is essential for learning new material. So things like choral repetition, drilling in pairs, mixing different drilling strategies can make it seem a little bit more interesting. Now then, the fifth one is quite interesting, and it's mouth positions. So it might be be uncomfortable for you to have students look at your mouth, but you should still do this. And the reason for this is that speakers of different languages, they hold and move the muscles of the mouth in different ways. So for correct pronunciation, the students need to hold their mouths properly. And the way they will be able to do this is by watching how it's done. And additionally, some students may not be able to produce a sound such as th simply because they can hear and identify it. They also need to have some visual input from you. And this comes from having them look closely at you while you produce certain sounds. And another thing that's very useful here is using mirrors. So once you've demonstrated to your students how you, for instance, pronounce the sound th, yeah, you can have them use a mirror and try and copy the kind of movements you made and watch themselves in the mirror and see if they're doing it right. So they will be able to see if they're moving their muscles in the same way as you are, and they can see the positioning of their tongues as they pronounce the sound th, for instance, and just become aware of the physical movements that are required to make certain sounds. So have them use a mirror. And another very useful tool in improving pronunciation is recording and re-recording your students. So at times your students may think that they're using correct pronunciation, but in fact it turns out that they're saying something quite different. So using a device to record what they're actually saying and gives you a data to play back to that person. And encourage them to listen to what they actually said rather than what they think they said. And you may also want to compare a recording of a native speaker against a recording of your student. So this way they will have a more objective understanding if their pronunciation is correct and if there is something that they need to change. Another thing, so this actually also has a very motivational value, because when you record your students' pronunciation at the beginning of the lesson, for instance, and then the same passage at the end, you can use this to show them their progress. Another thing you can do is you can record them read something at the beginning of the year and then record the same thing again at the end of the year, and this will demonstrate their progress even more and boost their confidence and encourage them to continue working on pronunciation, because they will be able to hear the difference. So good to use some technology in pronunciation as well. And the next tip is we've discussed a little bit about the accent, and again, I just want to stress that don't get hung up on the accent, and tell your students not to get hung up on the accent as well. So teaching good pronunciation skills in English is not the same as eradicating a first language influenced accent. So again, the goal of your students is to speak in a way that will make them understood by native English speakers. And as long as they can speak clearly, as long as they pronounce the sounds correctly, this is the most important thing, and they should be satisfied with that. However, when the accent does become too strong, it becomes a barrier for communication. So again, here you just need to adjust and see if your student is understood. If they're not making any mistakes, then there are other things to work on rather than trying to eradicate the accent. Another thing that can help you is beating the rhythm. So sometimes something as simple as beating the rhythm of a word or a sentence on your desk or with your hands can help your students to understand word or sentence stress, and they will begin to understand syllables and syllable length. So, for instance, if you take the word interesting and you beat it out with your hand, students will be able to hear that there are really 3 syllables in pronunciation, not 4, as it might seem when you're reading the word, and that the stress is on the first syllable, which is longer and louder than the others. So, again, this is another very easy way to demonstrate stress in pronunciation for them. Tip number 10 is to use poems and songs, because songs and poetry are natural, in fact, for teaching pronunciation, as both of these genres focus on the sound of the language. And they use devices such as rhyming and assonance and alliteration, which is similarity of consonant sounds. So if you try to use popular songs that your students know well, having heard them many times. They will be able to make the connection between the pronunciation of the song which they've heard and its written form. So this is a great tool. And we finally come to minimal pairs, which are crucial when teaching pronunciation. And minimal pairs are words that differ in only one sound, and they are a great way to focus pronunciation on one particular phoneme. So, for example, pin and pen, dim and dime, bat and pat. So these are all examples of minimal pairs because there is only one sound that differs between the two words. And you can use minimal pairs to help your students with their pronunciation by focusing on that one particular sound that you want them to teach. And final general teaching tip is to use visuals in your pronunciation lessons. It's hard for students to simply imagine the difference in spelling, not to mention remember all the different phonetic symbols. And this is why it's a great idea, in my opinion, to teach them the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet, and in your pronunciation lessons to use visual aids like consonant flashcards. You can see an example on the screen, or IPA flashcards. And in this way, your students will not only hear the correct pronunciation, but they will see it too. Some of us, I'm sure, hate using phonetic transcriptions. I did once, but they actually show students, especially those who are struggling to hear the correct pronunciation, exactly how the English word is supposed to sound. So visuals are a great aid. Okay. Are there any questions? I see there are quite a few. Okay, a link to YouTube video classes. Yes, I think that's a great idea, so I will get back to you. Okay, Rita loves teaching transcription. That's great. I know a lot of people, we're going to talk about that in a second, but a lot of people find that like a separate language to learn, so I'm glad that you're a fan. Okay, and yes, guys, definitely YouTube is a great resource for you to use, so sometimes you don't even need to plan a lesson or try and think up something new. A lot of it is already there. Okay, right. Now then, we've started talking about transcriptions, and the question is, should you teach the IPA? Should you teach all these symbols that you see on the screen? And there is a debate on this, but the general answer is yes, because it's very useful for students to have a system for writing down the sounds of words. So the IPA relies on alphabet, and it is actually very familiar, so there are only a few new characters. And an hour of practice with the system is enough to gain fluency, and once you've gained this fluency, you'll have it for life. And the same applies to your student. So I would say from my experience, most of the Russian-speaking English teachers have mastered it sort of at the very beginning while they were still students, but this is actually new for a lot of native speakers, and they need to be convinced that this is something that they can use in their teaching. The benefits of learning the IPA and of using it are many, because a lot of students who are learning English, they are baffled by the spelling system. So, for example, why should bought and thought have the same vowel sound? Or why do fill the name and fill the verb begin with the same consonant sound? So teaching them the IPA removes spelling as a barrier, and it invites your students to consider the variety of spellings that each sound might have. Also, so again, now this might not be as relevant since most of the students are using electronic dictionaries, but I would say even 10 years ago, it was crucial to know the IPA to be able to use a dictionary, since most good quality dictionaries include transcriptions for each word. So knowing the IPA makes your student more independent, and they will be able to pronounce the word without much help from you. And teaching the IPA might not seem as boring, might not be as boring as it might seem. There are some games that you can use to do this, and the first game is called the Stations game. This is a fun game to use if you're teaching a group or a class. So obviously it will not work online. And what you do is you label each wall of your classroom with one phonetic symbol representing a sound that you might want your students to learn. Then you read out a word which uses one of these 4 sounds that you have put on your walls, and students need to race to the wall with the correct symbol. Anybody The wrong vowel is eliminated and must sit down. And you can also eliminate anybody who gets to the vowel too late. So this is optional. So each round you read out a new word and you keep eliminating people who run to the wrong vowel. And the last person standing wins the game. This is actually a great game to play also with vocabulary or grammar topics, but with IPA, in my experience, it works best. The second game you can play is phoneme bingo, and you can see an example on the screen. On a bingo sheet, you write words in different boxes, and you make sure that all the students have different bingo sheets. And then you put a different phoneme on small individual cards in a bag. You choose one card from the back, you show your students the phoneme, and they must look at their bingo sheets and cross out a word containing that phoneme if they have it. Okay, and the third game you can play is called The Race is On, and this is a great activity to review phonemes. So what you do is you prepare a set of cards with the different words and a set of cards with different phonemes. You place the cards with phonemes in front of teams of students, and then you show them one of the word cards. So the first student of each team must choose a card with a phoneme that corresponds to the words that you're showing. So this is a game where you have to be very quick. And if it is correct, the group gets to keep the card with the word. If not, then the teacher keeps the card. So the team with the most cards wins. Okay, and final game is called What's the Word? And this is where you give your students words that are spelled phonetically, and they must try and guess what the word actually is. You can see an example on the screen, yeah? So students should be able to guess that this word is in fact mother. And the best way to go about this exercise is to practice words with similar sound so that you students begin to see a pattern. So these games are just to demonstrate that any topic, even as baffling and daunting as teaching IPA, could actually be made fun, and you can help your students to enjoy learning it and to learn it effectively. Okay, now then I would like for us to discuss teaching specific sounds and different strategies you might use to do that, but before this, do we have any questions? Okay, so Dilara thinks that majority of Russians don't care about pronunciation. The goal is simply to survive abroad. I think, Dilara, what you mean is majority of Russians don't care about the accent because, as we've mentioned, pronunciation, it's a little bit different and it's crucial for having you understood. Yes, if you're mispronouncing the words, then it's very difficult to be understood by whatever environment you're in. Okay, right. Okay, guys, if there are any more questions, you can write them into the question rubric at the top. Okay, now then, we've discussed some common pronunciation mistakes that students make, and let's have a look at some strategies and games that you can use to teach your students and to help them work on these mistakes. So the first sound is, of course, the sound th, which is one of the most difficult to master for English students. And a great way to teach this sound is through use of tongue twisters. You can find plenty of them. And you can also play a game called thesaurus. So what you do is you prepare a list of words that begin with th, and these are your thesaurus words, and then you pick a synonym for each word. You will have a list that looks like a list on the screen, which you should be able to see. So, for example, the synonym for think would be believe, yeah. The synonym for thrifty would be cheap, and so on. And what you do is you divide your group or class into two teams, and you read out the synonyms. What they need to do is they need to think of a word for that synonym which begins with th. So, for instance, you read out the word believe, and hopefully one of the students will shout out the word think. And apart from being fun and testing their vocabulary, this word also helps them practice the words that begin. This game helps them practice the words that begin with th without making the whole process seem too boring. Then, speaking of vowel length, what you can use here are again minimal pairs. So you can, for instance, you can do competitions where the students see who can hold the sound the longest. For instance, sit and seat, yeah, have them try and pronounce the E as long as they can. And students will remember some contrast more easily if you, again, present them in minimal pairs, yeah? So have them repeat after you things like live and leave, yeah? 3 and tree, slip, sleep, yeah? So just by accentuating those points, they will be able to see the contrast and remember. And another great way to practice the vowel length is, of course, singing, because it requires a person to maintain vowel sounds over more than just a moment. So you can, again, even try and sing those minimal pairs and have your students do the same. Okay, then as for practicing the schwa sound, which we've discussed, basically the only thing you can do here is teach your students to be aware of it, give them examples of words that use the schwa sound, and ask them to identify it in those words. And finally, with the magic E rule, basically you just need to explain it. So you show your students how the addition of letter E at the end of the word changes its pronunciation. So give them some examples such as bit, bite, dim, dime, pin, pine, and then give them some more examples and ask them to read these out by themselves. Okay, so these are things that you can use for teaching specific sounds. And again, pronunciation does not have to be boring, and you can use plenty of games to teach it. So I've tried to group these games into different categories, and the first game is called verb endings. And we know that there are 3 possible sounds for verb endings in present simple, yeah? So s as in talks, z as in sees, and is as in confuses. Okay, and also the same applies to past simple endings in past simple verbs. So the verb can end as in stayed, d, t as in talked, and ud as in wanted. So after going over these differences, you can divide the whiteboard or the screen into 3 columns, and you read out a verb, and then you ask the student to say this verb in third person singular or in past simple, and then you ask them to place this verb into the correct column. After you kind of help them with the first few examples, just start firing off the verbs one after another, and the students must correctly pronounce the verb ending. If they make a mistake, they must try with a different verb until they get one right. So this game teaches them to be aware of the endings. The second game is called Pronunciation Maze, and you can find these on the internet. You can see an example on the screen. And in this game, the student must connect words that have the same vowel sound. So on the screen, we have a pronunciation maze where the first word is boys, and the student needs to choose the correct words to get to the final word, which is choice. So they must follow the path by using the words that have the oi sound. You can also create your own maze, or you can, as I've said, download some of these from the internet. There are plenty of them. The next game is 4 in a row, and this is a very good game for young learners. So what you do is you print out the 4 in a row worksheet or make your own, and you cut it up into separate cards. So the students must arrange the words into sets that have a sound in common. For example, if you're teaching a group of students, you can have them work in teams, and the first team to complete all the sets, to have 4 words together, wins. Okay, and the fourth game is called the rhyming pair memory game, and you make cards with words that rhyme, such as name game, fox box, tick stick. You place them face down, and your students take turns turning over the cards and trying to find the pairs that rhyme. Okay, and the final game is for teaching pronunciation to very young students, and it's called Join the Dots. So what you need to do is you need to prepare a join the dots activity, which again you can find on the internet, and then you have your student read out words. Every time they read out a word correctly, they're allowed to join 2 dots together. So this makes it a little bit more fun than just sitting and reading, which children might not necessarily want to do. Okay, so these are phoneme games, and there are also some nice games to practice minimal pairs. The first one is called mimicking pairs, and what you do is you have your students repeat sentences like sit in your seat, chips are cheap. Your niece is nice. So these are good practice, and they're also quite fun. The second game you can use is called Which One Makes Sense, and you present your students with two sets of possible answers to a question. For example, we have hit it and heat it, and you tell your students the soup is cold, what should I do? And they should choose the correct minimal pair. Or, for example, you ask them, what did he take fishing? And your student should say, he took the bait, not he took the bat. And this fun game, it challenges students to listen for specific vowel sounds and kind of try and test their vocabulary as well. And the final game is called What's Your Number? And what you do here is, as you can see on the screen, you write a word next to each number from 1 to 9. Okay, from 1 to 10. For example, number 1 will be put, number 2 will be pet, number 3 will be pet, but with letter E, number 4 will be Pete, and so on. And then you tell your students that you're going to give them your phone number, but instead of saying the numbers, you say these words, and they should write them down as numbers. In the end, you check if they've written down the number correctly. Then you can have your student give you their phone number, but telling you the actual numbers, they should tell you the words. Yeah. For example, if my number starts with 423, I will tell the student Pete, pet, pet. Yeah, and then they should be able to write it. Okay, so this is another great way to test their pronunciation. Okay, and so the minimal pair games and the phoneme games are games that you can technically adapt if you are teaching your student one-to-one. And finally, there are also some fun games that you can teach if you have a group of students. Now, then we're not going to stop on those for too long, but perhaps if you would like to take a screenshot, and then you can find them on the internet. Yes, so these are some group games that you can use. Some of them might involve cards. One of them, Give It a Shot, is quite interesting, which is what happens here is students will record, so you need to put 2 trash cans in front of your room, and you label each trash can with a different vowel sound that your students have trouble distinguishing, or it can be a consonant like v and w. Then you put students into 2 teams, and you have a player from one team come to the front of the room and read out a word. And then another member of their team should shoot a crumpled piece of paper into the basket with the correct sounds. The students love this game, and I would definitely recommend it for teaching distinguishing, for teaching minimal pairs and for having students distinguish between the sounds. Okay, so if you would like to take a screenshot, these are kind of games that you can check out and play if you're teaching a group. Okay, before we move on, any questions concerning games? Yes, practical material, absolutely. Yes, we will be sharing websites and links. Okay. Okay, any more questions concerning games? Okay, guys, I will link you to all the games that I've mentioned because we will be sending you an email, with the recording, and I will make sure that there are links to the different games. Okay, now then, speaking of tongue twisters, which are kind of a separate topic when we talk about pronunciation. So they are a great tool to use because they not only challenge your students' pronunciation abilities, but they also add an element of fun to the classroom, and they can help your students relax and make them a little bit more daring in their attempts in English. And again, what you can do is you can just write a tongue twister on the board and ask your students to read it or repeat it after you, but I would recommend a more systematic approach. So first of all, you need to choose a tongue twister of appropriate level, because a lot of them them are quite long, so you may need to cut them down. And also try and choose tongue twisters with teaching potential. So, for example, Peter Piper is a great tongue twister if you want to practice, for your students to practice the pronunciation of ed endings, because there are a lot of regular verbs. And Betty Botter, which you can see on the screen, has lots of great consonant sounds, such as B. So again, don't just grab any tongue twister, choose one that relates to the phoneme that you're teaching. And what you do next is you hand out copies of the tongue twister to your students, and you have them read the tongue twister to themselves. Then you discuss any words that may not be familiar, like butter in Betty Botter, yeah? And make sure that they understand what the tongue twister is trying to say, because there is usually some logic, yeah, to what initially seems to be very random jumble of words. So once you've discussed the vocabulary, once your students understand the tongue twister, you ask them to read it out loud, but you don't stop them and you don't correct them. Instead, you make a note of the problem areas. And only then would I recommend reading each line or section one at a time and asking the students to repeat it after you. It's a good idea to focus on specific consonant or vowel sounds. So, for instance, you can practice the T in words like better, butter, and bitter. So it's a great opportunity to practice that sound. And also, the way you can turn this into a game or make it more fun is to ask your student to speed up each time they read the tongue twister. And if you're teaching a group, you can turn this into a competition. So the student needs to pronounce the tongue twister correctly in order to stay in the next round. And with each round, you speed it up. So you make the pronunciation more challenging for them. And finally, this is a great follow-up. You can have your students write their own tongue twisters. And this will help them not only practice their pronunciation, but be more aware of which sounds, of the sounds that are in the words that they know. And they really need to choose the words carefully. And at the end, there is always kind of a lot of fun and laughing as people share their crazy results. Yes, so definitely have that as a follow-up activity. Okay, now then, there are also some strategies for teaching stress and intonation. We are unfortunately going to skip those to make sure that we are within our time limit. The only thing I wanted to mention is quite often students, they come to a level where they have a good pronunciation, but they do the robot, which means they speak in monotone with no color, no feeling. And this doesn't mean that they don't feel the language, but this means that perhaps their teacher didn't stress the importance of stress enough. So the two common mistakes that students make with stress are stress on the wrong syllable. Yes, so saying, I would say personal favorite is saying hotel instead of hotel. And the second stress mistake is stress on the wrong word. Yes, so for instance, choosing the wrong word in a sentence that they stress. And what you can do here is there are some strategies that you can use. So first of all, draw their attention to the importance of stress. Second, provide examples. Yes, so hotel and hotel is a good one. The third one is to go over basic rules. And for instance, give them words like rebel and rebel and tell them that depending on what stress they use, one of the words is a noun and one is a verb. Then use contrast. So you can just ask students, do we say hotel or do we say hotel? And have them choose. And finally, it's time for practice. So what you can do here, you can see on the screen the red example number 4 is you give your students words and you also give them numbers which are underlined, and you ask them to choose a word and match it with the correct combination. So for instance, if we look at the first combination, the number 1 is underlined, which means that the students need to write the word telephone next to it. So you can give them this kind of matching game as practice. Okay, and the same applies to sentence stress. So have them read out sentences to them with different stress. For example, you think I saw the monster, and then you think I saw the monster, and then you think I saw the monster. And with each example, ask them to explain to you the difference in meaning and the difference in context to these examples. Okay, so this concerns sentence stress. And then with intonation, this is kind of the cherry on top. The common mistakes are that students do not raise their pitch. So they say, do you like chocolate? And it sounds like a statement. And the second mistake is that they use the wrong pitch. So there is quite a lot of difference between really and really. Yeah, these might have different meanings. And what you can do here is you can demonstrate the importance of intonation by exaggerating. You can give students different examples and ask them to explain whether the intonation in the example is rising or falling, what emotion this intonation expresses, so whether you're being sarcastic or scared or you're expressing disbelief. And finally, just have them read out different sentences to them and ask them to guess the emotion that you are trying to convey with a sentence. So I would say with teaching intonation and stress, the most important thing is just to make students be aware of it and to give them some chance to practice it on their own, because very often we might focus on pronunciation, but students are not even aware of how important intonation is in English. Okay, again, we're going to skip this slide. Right, and sort of for dessert, I wanted to focus a little bit on different tools that your students can use for pronunciation. So obviously in the modern age, English learners can work on a lot of things with the use of self-study materials. So they can do as many grammar exercises as they want. They can work with audio and video to improve their listening. They can even join native English speakers in their free time for some extra speaking practice. But it's not likely, even if your students go to a speaking club, it's not likely that their pronunciation will be corrected there, because pronunciation is one of those things that only teachers correct in the classroom. So friends and acquaintances, they will usually let pronunciation mistakes slide, yeah, for the sake of keeping the conversation flowing. However, there are, in today's technological age, there are some apps that you can use, and self-practice of pronunciation is no longer a problem. So I've selected my 5 favorite apps. The first one is called Sounds, the pronunciation app, and it was developed by Macmillan Publishers. This app features an interactive phonemic chart, and what's interesting is that they have one both for American and for British English. Also, there is a How Do You Say option, which allows your students to not only listen to how the word is pronounced, but they can also record and play back their own voice. And there is possibility to buy additional word lists. Although the app is free, you can always upgrade and sort of move on to new lists of words once they've mastered the ones that they're free. Okay, the second app is English File Pronunciation, and this app also allows students to switch between American and British English. It features an interactive sound chart. There are over 200 sample words, and it's quite useful. Then Pronunciation Clear Speech is the third app that I wanted to share. And again, it adds a little bit more fun into pronunciation practice, because there are 4 games that students can choose. And this is an app for intermediate English pronunciation, but there is also another version for pre-intermediate learners. Okay, the 4th app is How Do You Say Pronunciation Dictionary, and this isn't so much of an app as a dictionary, but it is the largest English dictionary in the world. It has over 150,000 entries, so again, students can use it to check if they're pronouncing the words correctly. And then the final app is Pronunciation King, and it comes again in the UK English version and US English version, and students are able to check their pronunciation of sort of any word, and they can also practice their pronunciation through the text, speech-to-text mode. So these are some apps that I found very useful, and I recommend them to my students. As well as apps, you can use some of these websites. Okay, so the first one is BBC Learning English, and what this website has are some excellent pronunciation tips. There are opportunities for pronunciation practice, and there are different interactive quizzes and radio programs that they use to teach pronunciation. The second website is Rachel's English, and some of you have mentioned using YouTube, as a teaching source. So I would really recommend this website. So in the videos, Rachel shows students how to pronounce specific sounds, and also there are some very good videos on intonation and stress. Okay, then the third website is Inogolo, and this is a very interesting website because they have pronunciation guides in which students can hear the pronunciation of words and names connected to a specific topic. So one of the most recent guides that they've published is the Lord of the Rings pronunciation guide. So, for instance, if your student is a fan of the film, you can get them interested in pronunciation by having them study this guide and pronounce all the words from the film and the books. Okay, the fourth website is ESL Station, and this one was developed by San Jose City College, or Jose City College, and there are different interactive pronunciation activities, which include syllables and stress patterns in words, rhythmic patterns, and also there are different listening exercises and quizzes on the website. Okay, and the other ones, again, you can make a screenshot. I would specifically focus on words and pictures. If you have young learners, this is a great website. And there are interactive pronunciation games specifically for children, which help them practice consonant and vowel sounds, and also the CVC words. So this website is one of the best tools you can use to introduce young learners to phonemes. This is the website number 8. Okay, and website number 9 is again for young learners, and what they can do here is they can choose different vowel consonant combinations, and they can explore different words that use these combinations. So as you can see, students have no excuse not to practice pronunciation on their own because there are such great resources that they can use even for self-practice. Okay, and we're almost at the end of the webinar, so hopefully we've covered major pronunciation issues, and you can solve them by playing games with your students, by giving them apps for self-study, and in general, pronunciation is something that can be fun and can be effective, and also, as we've mentioned, very important to teach, to make sure that students can show off all this great vocabulary and grammar that you've been working on. Okay, Anna is sending us some very nice resources. Foro, okay, I have not used that website, but I will definitely check it out. Okay, ABCYA. Excellent. Okay, and guys, I'm just going to look at the questions. Okay, materials for the platform. I think we will definitely need to have perhaps the pronunciation rubric, and I will definitely be posting the materials and the games that I've mentioned in our webinar. I'll be posting them as a separate list, so don't worry if you've missed something. Okay, do you know about the book Tree or Three? Unfortunately, I have not heard about the book, no. To be checked out. Tips for reducing typical Russian accent in English. So I would say all of these tips that we've mentioned, they will help you to reduce the accent through achieving correct pronunciation. But with focusing on Russian accents, so you have to look at the most common problems that Russian-speaking students have. And I would say these are sounds such as f and z, w and v, so you need to focus specifically on those sounds to help them reduce the accent. Okay, yes, and I think those are all the questions. Yeah, so when teaching your students, each nationality have some sounds in English that they find difficult, so you need to prepare such tasks and such games that will help your students to work on these specific sounds. Yeah, so for instance, I would recommend starting with the sound F. Yeah, we've mentioned some games and tricks that you can use to help them achieve that sound. Okay, guys, we had quite a lot of material, so I hope you're not too overwhelmed at the end of this hour. And I thank you very much for joining on a Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon. It was a pleasure hosting this webinar. I will not forget to post all the materials that we have, so please make sure that you check the SkyTeach website. I think that will be posted there. And yeah, thank you again very much for your participation and attention. And I hope that we will see each other again in the future. So thanks very much. Goodbye, everybody.